Good morning and welcome, everyone. I'm Aretha Lafayette, Program Manager for Research Education Program Development and Outreach in the Office of Research and Innovation, and I will serve as your MC for today's session. Allow me to introduce our amazing presenters for today. Cindy Sutton serves as the Director of the Office in the Office of Post-Award Management. She has been at UT Dallas for over 30 years in various roles and in the Office of Research for 11 years. Natasha Hinton is the Associate Director for OPM and Research Financial Reporting. She has worked for UT Dallas for 15 years, and she has been with the Office of Research for 11 of those years. Maria Morris currently serves as the Contract and Grant Specialist for OPM. She has worked at UTD for 14 years. She worked in procurement for the first 5 years. Thank you all for joining us today, and you all have the floor.
Good morning, and thank you all for joining us. We wanted to start our four-part series with Can I Buy That? Because we have a lot of questions from the departments. Can I buy that? Can I do this? Can we do that? And so that's what we thought we would make this. We hope it's fun, not necessarily fun, but interactive and enjoyable, and a good way to get this series started with something that we can do. So we're going to ask some questions. We'll have a discussion. We'll go over some of the rules and regulations for everybody. And at the end, we hope that y'all have some questions that you've brought us and that we can maybe help you. Can you buy that? So there are many different factors that make up the allowability of a purchase. First one is the federal government regulations. Then we have sponsor regulations. We have state of Texas regulations. And then we even go down to the UTD regulations. Now, the federal government is sometimes the top tier, then the sponsor. However, the sponsor regulations cannot make a federal government regulation go away. They can make it stronger or more strict, but they can't lessen the federal regulation. Just as a UTD regulation cannot make the state of Texas regulation less, or a sponsor or a federal government. We can always make it stronger or more strict, but we can't go up and change what the federal government has said. For an example, if the federal government says on a Fly America Act that when we fly foreign, we have to follow the Fly America Act. Well, that's flying on an American carrier. There are exceptions to these rules. There always are for different things. However, if your sponsor is the Department of Defense, there are no exceptions to the Fly America Act. They've made that stronger. You have to follow the Fly America Act. It's like if we say, okay, yes, you can travel on to foreign countries. However, the state of Texas on a secret project, there's pretty much no foreign travel unless there's a pre-approval and some very, very strict regulations. So that the state of Texas has made it harder on that one. And they don't allow per diem. The Texas, we have to have receipts for every expense for travel. So like we can't claim per diem on a secret project. So that's some of the factors that make up the allowability of the purchase. Then we have the federal factors. They have to be necessary and reasonable. That's one of the main things that we say. How does it benefit the project? When we ask you, and we ask the departments to provide more information on how does it affect the project, we are trying to make sure that it's necessary and reasonable for the performance of that award, that you have to have those items, those specific items for the research to be continued and carried out. There are some other things here. I'm not going to read them all to you. We just have to make sure that they don't fit other categories as far as what people would consider that they should be part of F&A or our indirect cost. So what defines reasonable? A cost is reasonable if it is needed and doesn't exceed what a normal person would do. So what we try to say is if what you would do on a normal circumstance or normal situation, if you're paying for this with your own money, would you buy it that way? Or would you think, okay, I'm buying this with federal funds, or the University of Texas is buying this, I can buy what I want. If I want a $500 pair of headphones as opposed to a $50 pair of headphones, would you buy that $500 one with your own money, or would you buy the $50 one? We try to be reasonable and make sure that things aren't extravagant or out of line with reasonableness. And sometimes the auditors that we've dealt with, we've argued with them that what it's reasonable for this person, it might not be reasonable for the next person. So sometimes we have to be really careful how we state things and how we list them out. If you are in Washington, D.C. on a travel and you have to buy something on an emergency, then need to be reimbursed, it might be more expensive there than it would be, let's say, back home in Dallas. So that might be a reasonable reason to pay for more for something that we're doing. Reasonables. I tried being reasonable and I didn't like it, said Clint Eastwood. Well, that's when he was Dirty Harry. First of all, cost will be unallowable if they're not reasonable, even if they meet other criteria. So if you're spending on a grant like Dirty Harry, out of control and accountable to no one, we don't expect it to end well when an auditor shows up. And sometimes we have to be careful that we are planning on that auditor to show up. And like we said, remember, this money is not ours and it's not ours. And sometimes we try to we think about it. Okay, would I buy that if I was paying, like I said earlier, with our own money? It's the taxpayers. We're all taxpayers, and we want our money to be spent in a reasonable manner. So like we said, no $6,000 toilet seats, please. Documentation. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Well, our deepest fear sometimes is our documentation may not be sufficient. Is this keeping you up at night? I know sometimes for myself, I've sat and thought later after I've approved a requisition, even the next day, man, should we have done that? Should we have approved that? I start second guessing myself. I start trying to think. And so I want to make sure that when I go to bed at night or the next day, when I'm thinking about it, I'm confident that what we did was right. We followed our documentation rules. We have everything that we need. So if I know that the auditor is showing up tomorrow to look at that expense, am I confident that what we have will suffice for their research and what they want to do? So make sure that we have the documentation in place and get it while it's fresh in your mind. That's one of the best things that we can do. We don't want to try to be digging for receipts 2 years from now or trying to remember why we bought something 2 years ago. We've had that with the NSF audit when people couldn't find copies, we couldn't find things, and they couldn't remember even making the purchase. And that's totally acceptable. That why would I remember that $50 purchase from 2 years ago? But so if we have the documentation up front, if we have good documentation, good justification on the requisitions, we won't have to try to remember that. We'll have those things ready up front, all ready to go. One of the things that we watch for is missing receipts. We need to really make sure that we have those receipts. For example, like we said, secret, they don't accept a missing receipt form. They want a receipt. If you don't have a receipt, we can't put that on there. We have to charge it somewhere else. We can't put it on the secret project. We want to make sure that the receipts have enough detail to determine what was purchased, not just lab supplies. We need to know what those lab supplies are. List them out. They need to be listed out in detail and by the date and everything that was done. And we want to make sure that we have the right authorization when we spend these things. And then, like, for example, number 4, it talks about inadequate screening or documentation. Well, we are pretty good. OPM, we believe, is really good at screening and pre-approving every expense, whether it's, like we've always said, whether it's $5 or $5 million. We approve every expense on sponsored projects. A lot of universities can't say that. We can say that, and we're very proud that that's one of the things that we do, and we're very, we're pretty thorough on those things. So we hope that that helps the university and other places continue on. And then, like we said, reasonable. No, I went the wrong way. I'm sorry. I don't know how I did that. So Natasha will start with the next one.
Good morning. I will talk about, do you recognize these common unallowable costs? There's 5 types of unallowable costs that you may encounter as you're working on your projects and requesting expense reimbursements. The first thing is certain types of travel costs, personal use of goods and services, alcoholic beverages, entertainment costs, and public relation costs. We're going to go through each one of these and discuss examples of them. First thing we'll talk about, next slide, will be travel costs. So one thing to think about, with travel, if you're buying an airfare ticket, is it reasonable and consistent with our policy related to travel guidelines? If you're booking your airfare and you're on a commercial airline, think about when you purchase that ticket. Are you going to buy a standard coach ticket, which would be allowable, or are you going to ask for an upgrade or a business class, which would not be allowable? There's certain guidelines that we have to follow to make sure when airline tickets are purchased that an auditor, if they pull that, information, that we are following the rules and guidelines. So for example, a commercial ticket that's not coach or equivalent fare, the cost would be unallowable. In other words, the first class wouldn't be allowed. You would have to only cover on that sponsored project the cost of the coach. Anything that exceeds that would have to be covered elsewhere. It could not be on that federal project. Like Cindy mentioned earlier, think of if you're doing foreign travel with Fly America Act, you have to make sure that the airlines are a United States airline. So say, for example, you fly to Italy. Are those airlines going to meet the Fly America Act and also the Overseas Open Skies Act, Open Skies Agreement? So you have to make sure that you're not flying on, say, for example, Air Canada. That is not a U.S. airline. If that gets caught, we would have to come back to you and say, okay, the amount of that purchase for that leg of the trip would not be allowed on the project. So that's things that we want to make sure we watch for. Personal use of goods and services, cost of things that you would use personally but not related to that project would not be allowed. Say, for example, you're on travel and you forget, say, razors or toothpaste or toothbrushes. You would not be able to get reimbursed for that on the federal project. That would have to be something that you would just have to cover out of your own expenditures. Those costs would be unallowable. And when auditors pull receipts, they do look at the details. If you ask for an expense reimbursement, they will look at that to make sure personal goods, even souvenirs, are not on the receipts. They just want to make sure that we aren't paying for things that are not allowed. Charging for travel costs for family members. So if you go on a travel, for a conference and you have family members that come along, you can only get reimbursed for your portion of the travel. You cannot cover your family members' meals, airfare, any other type of expenditures. You cannot cover those on your sponsored project. That would have to come out of your own personal funds and not being reimbursed by the university. Personal use of office supplies or shipping services. If you're trying to ship something personally back home or to wherever, you could not get reimbursed for that. And then purchasing electronics that do not relate to the project. Say, for example, you forgot a charger for your personal cell phone. You would not be able to get reimbursed for that. So just things to think about when you're traveling and receipts come in and you're asking for reimbursements. Think of it as, can I justify this on the project, or is this something for my own personal use? Like Cindy mentioned, when requisitions come through, we do review every expense that comes through. The next thing, alcoholic beverages and entertainment. This is a very big thing. When you sign your travel authorization and your requisitions, you're signing off that you did not have any alcohol purchases on your reimbursements. So that is very important when you're going through, especially meal receipt reimbursements for travel, that if there's alcohol in it, that is deducted from the receipt. We do pay attention to that to make sure that alcohol is not reimbursed. Also, social activities. If you're traveling and you go to, say, a baseball game or like a Broadway show or an opera, you would not be able to get reimbursed for that as part of your that would be considered entertainment, and you could not get reimbursed for that. Any other entertainment related expenses, just something to keep in mind, that is not reimbursable on federal projects. Next, public relations. Type of public relation costs that are generally unallowable include meetings, conventions, or events that promote non-award activities. So for an example of unallowable thing would be example 1, cost of displays, exhibits, and hospitality suites. You could not get that reimbursed on your federal project. Cost of staff compensation to support these unallowable costs. That would, auditors will question, what is the justification for this expense? And if it's deemed unallowable, we would have to reimburse the sponsor back for that expense. Another big thing is cost for memorabilia, gifts, and souvenirs. That is something to be very mindful, like souvenirs such as coffee mugs, stress balls, t-shirts, anything promotional. Those are not reimbursable and are unallowable on the sponsored project. We do have exceptions where we've had specific projects that did list specific items in their proposal, and the sponsor did give approval for that. So we do check if we see items like that, we go to the proposal and make sure that it has been pre-approved by the sponsor. Otherwise, we will come back to the departments asking, letting you know that it needs to be on a different cost center and getting more information. So there are, always exceptions if it is in the proposal and pre-approved. Next, in other words, when you're asking for reimbursements and putting in requests for expenses, think of reasonable. Like Cindy mentioned, would a prudent person have purchased this item and paid that price? If it's extravagant or something out of the ordinary, we will question it and ask for more justification. Especially with airline tickets, you need to be mindful when you're purchasing airline tickets. Make sure that you've done your comparisons and gone through Concur Travel, that we have followed our guidelines. Allocable, if the expenses are on that project, make sure that you can justify why it's on the project. If you have, say, lab supplies, but you're charging it to one project, but it may benefit other projects, make sure that you're proportionally allocating that portion to that project. So don't just pay 100% in one project when it's meant for multiple projects. You need to proportionally split it accordingly. Allowable, make sure that the expenses is allowable. For, like we mentioned, don't have souvenirs on there, alcohol, other, unallowable expenses that may not be deemed, allowable. Like secret, we cannot have, I think it is, we can't have, when you pay for a meal, you can't have the gratuity on there. That's unallowable. And then state tax, for hotels, if you're in a hotel in Texas, our state tax cannot be charged to that. So think of that for allowable costs. And then office supplies. If you're buying office supplies for your general office use, like a printer that's in a departmental area, you would not want to charge that specifically to the project. So if an expense cannot meet any of the above criteria, then think of it as it's not eligible for inclusion in the indirect cost rate, and it would not be allowable. So always think about what auditors are going to look for when you put that expense through. Do you have the documentation? Do you have the justification? Is it allowable? Just always think of that, because auditors have a good eye for picking certain expenses. They will notice something and they will pick that, and then we have to provide all the documentation. And many times we have to go back with additional information for why it's justifiable. So we do not have to, so we don't have to pay the sponsor back and get an audit finding. So that is just something always to keep in mind on when you're looking at expenses and if you can buy that. The other thing, like Cindy mentioned, all the policies and procedures, UTD policies are federal guidelines. We follow CFR 200. We will go back and look for that when we get asked, is this allowable? We go back to those regulations to make sure, okay, is it allowable and are we following policy and procedure? Next, Cindy's going to talk about our questions.
All right, let's test our knowledge a little bit. Let us know what you think on these. And now, if you'll notice that most of our faculty members will have some sports name related. So just be, we wanted to have a little bit of fun with that. So Dr. Dirk wants to purchase laboratory mice on his NIH project. The original budget has animals budgeted. However, he does not have an iCook on file. Can he purchase these animals? Yes or no? Everybody vote. What are y'all's thoughts? Is everybody voted? I can't tell. I don't know. People are.
Looks like the votes are no.
No, that's true. Even though he may have had money budgeted in the original budget and the proposal, and the budget had animals budgeted. If there's not an IOCOOK on file, we won't budget those dollars into animals. We wait till we have one on file. We check with our own people in research that is in charge of this. They're very good about getting those to us quickly if there's one on file. So just make sure that there is one. And if you know of one that we don't know about, you can forward it to OPM at utdallas.edu, and then we will verify. Again, we're not going to just take it for word that that's the right one. We'll verify with our own research group that does that and make sure that it is an allowable charge. The next one, Dr. Luca wants to purchase basic lab supplies on his project ending in 2 weeks. He has stated the purpose to not leave any funds on the table. Can he purchase these supplies? Yes or no? So the voters are all saying no. That is correct. Spending down is not an allowable expense on a project, no matter what the project is. There must be a valid justification for late purchases, and time must be allowed for the receipt of these purchases. So if it's the last 2 weeks and these items can't be received in those 2 weeks, then we're not going to allow it. We're going to ask you, when do you anticipate these items to be in? And if you have the words to spend down, to not leave funds on the table, anything that remotely looks like that on a requisition, we're going to deny it. That's not an allowable charge. Just because that you have $2,000 left and we don't want to let NIH keep their $2,000, that's not an allowable charge. And a lot of times there's not time to receive that much of an order either. And also something to be mindful of is, okay, we got we have allowed the requisition to go through. It's the department's responsibility to make sure that those encumbrances are cleared within 45 days of the end of the project. We can't be extending projects because, oh, we just now got it and it's now 82 days after the end of the project. That's not, it's going to have to be expensed somewhere else. Even though you got it, you can return it or you can pay for it from another project or another, not another project, another cost center that those expenses can be charged to. We can't put them on the project after that end date. So be careful that, and it is, we don't monitor those. There's way too many expenses for us to be worrying about the closeout end date. And that is in the closeout information that Natasha's group sends out when the projects are getting close to an end. So just be careful of those. Okay, Dr. Adolis is purchasing supplies to refill a common supply closet. The project doesn't end until 12/31/25 and it's federally funded. Can he purchase these supplies? Okay, so we have some mixed ideas on this one. The supplies themselves are probably okay. But the problem is filling a common supply closet that's being used across different projects. Like some people says it does depend on what's happening, but filling a supply closet is generally not allowed. We need to have those allocable across all those projects if they're being used for multiple projects. So just be careful when you start using that as a justification. We're going to really scrutinize. It's better to have those split across different projects if you're using them for the different projects. So just be careful that we're not filling a common supply closet on a general basis. If you're buying 5,000 beakers on that one project, they need to be used for that project. And then the auditors may ask, how in the world did you use 5,000 beakers for that one project? To be prepared for a justification on those. So Dr. Simeon has 2 students traveling to present posters at a conference. The students share the expense of an Airbnb and purchase food at the grocery store. Are these expenses allowed on a federal project? So yes, the sharing of the room is allowed and can be split between travelers. Somebody had a good comment that it does depend if the conference provides food or meals, then we wouldn't be allowed to have meals reimbursed. But most time, not all the meals are reimbursed. So if you're at an Airbnb, you can go to the grocery store to buy your food instead of a restaurant. A lot of times that is less expensive, and a lot of students we found that really prefer to go to at their Airbnb just to have their own food at their room and not have to worry about going out. But yes, sharing the room is allowed and can be split among the travelers. So Dr. Prescott has requested Christmas cards to be purchased on his NIH project. In the proposal, personal communications were listed in the budget justification. Can these cards be purchased with federal funds? Actually, yes. Because these are listed in the proposal and they were approved by the sponsor, so they would be allowable. We have several NIH, actually we've had several of these come up and it's generally when they were following up with research subjects and they want to stay in contact with them so that they continue to come back in and finish the study that they're on. There's Christmas cards, birthday cards, other things like that have been pre-approved in the proposal, and we have let them go through and had no issues with the sponsor. So those are allowable, but you can't just do it because all of a sudden now you know, oh, I can buy Christmas cards. It has to be already in the proposal and have a specific reason for, such as following up with the research subjects, so that people continue on with the research, the subjects, the payments. Tasha.
Okay. Dr. Kelsey has used a limo service to go from the airport to the hotel while on travel. The federal award will allow the expense. However, the university's policy is that limos are not reasonable. Is this expense to be approved or not? The answer is, it looks like most people said no. No, if the university policy states no, then we must follow the university policy. This has been a finding where we did not follow our own policy. So something to keep in mind, auditors will look at our policy and all the different policies with CFR 200. The agency policy can be more stringent than the sponsor, but not more lenient. So we have to make sure we follow which one, make sure we're following all our policies. Next question, Dr. Beltre took 12 people to dinner. Justification was graduation dinner for Ian Murphy. The list included 3 family members, his wife and 2 children. The source of funds was federal funding. Okay, I believe everybody said no. That is correct. No is the answer. Celebration parties are not allowed on federal funds, especially having family members reimbursed. So something that if you do business meetings, you could do reimbursement, but you cannot have family members. So we've noticed that we've seen some reimbursements tried for birthday parties, graduation parties, that type of things. You cannot use federal projects, federal or even private. You cannot use those. You would need to use some other type of funding, but you would have to check university policy, what UTD, if it's allowable or not. Okay, Dr. Beltre took 12 people to dinner. Justification was to discuss research being conducted by graduate students sponsored by this project. Source of funds is federal funding. Is this expense approved or not? Okay, voters just said yes, and I believe I kind of helped with this one. Yes, the collaboration is allowable in federal awards. You need to make sure you have detailed justification to help, make sure that this expense can be approved. Also, you need to list the people that were involved and the purpose. If you have family members, they would not be able to be reimbursed for that. You would need to exclude that expense. Okay, Mr. Madano is, buying a gown for hooding PhD graduates, and he would like to use his sponsored project. Should this expense be approved or not? Okay, looks like everybody said no. The student receiving the degree does not benefit from the research project. So no, you cannot buy your gown for hooding. Okay, Dr. Robertson has a federal project and has invited 2 visiting professors to assist with working on the grant. Should this expense be approved or not? Okay, it looks like most people said yes. Yes, as long as the work being done benefits the project. So make sure, as always, make sure you have the justification for the travel expenses that are being reimbursed and how those visiting professors are tied to it. So for any questions, you can contact OPM at opm@utdallas.edu, and also listed is our research website. You can go there. We have a lot of information on award management, the different processes. We have allowability, we have allocability, and different types of information on our website. Any additional questions?
Does anybody have any scenarios they'd like to discuss or have questions about specific maybe? And if you don't feel comfortable putting it in the chat or asking here, please reach out to us if you have questions. We're here to help. We try to say yes as much as we can. We really do try to make things go through smoothly and, so that people can be reimbursed for expenses and allow expenses. But ultimately, it is our responsibility to make sure that the university is not in danger. We're not at risk. We're not putting ourselves at risk for future funding and other issues like that. So, any questions?
Awesome. If there are no more questions, we'll go ahead and continue to our closeout. If you have any questions, we certainly have time, so feel free to drop those in the chat. I'd like to thank Cindy, Natasha, and Maria for joining us and presenting this amazing information to us. We appreciate you for pulling it together, and I'm sure it was valuable to those that were here. Audience, we appreciate your time and engagement as well, and thank you for playing along. Keep up with what's happening in the Office of Research and Innovation by following us on social media and subscribing to our newsletter. Please join us on Wednesday, May 8th at 10 a.m. for the second installment in this four-part series called Not Your Average Journal, where the OPM team will be sharing the ins and outs of submitting journals and OPM's one card process. During this session, attendees will get a closer look at the checklist of what is needed for a successful approval process. And as always, we value your feedback. So please take a moment to scan the QR code and complete the survey. And once you've done that, we'll allow you to go about the rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining us and have a wonderful day. We will hang around for a minute or two. If there are any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you guys for joining us today. And thank you guys. That was great. As always, I learned some amazing things. So thank you. It was an awesome training. We'll hang around for those who need to hang around. If you don't have any questions, feel free to log out. That way we won't leave anybody behind when we log out. I don't like leaving people behind.